একটু টেস্ট করে নেবেন, ইউটিউব লিঙ্কটা একটু টেস্ট করে নেবেন। স্টুডেন্টের মধ্যে যদি কেউ টেস্ট করতে চায় খুব ভালো হবে। তাহলে সাউন্ড আসছে কিনা সেটা দেখতে হবে মেনলি।
ওকে স্যার, করে নিচ্ছি। ওকে ওকে।
অ্যালেক্সা সাউন্ড হচ্ছে ইউটিউবে?
ইউটিউবে এখনো কিছু চলছে না তো। সাউন্ড কিছু বুঝতে পারছি না।
আচ্ছা এখান থেকে আমি বেরিয়ে যাচ্ছি, ঠিক আছে? আমি ইউটিউবে থাকছি। আপনার আপনার একটুখানি পরে একটু মাইক্রোফোনটা টেস্টিং করে নেবেন, ঠিক আছে?
ঠিক আছে।
Hello. Hello. Hello.
হ্যালো হ্যালো
হ্যাঁ স্যার শোনা যাচ্ছে।
শোনা যাচ্ছে স্যার।
দেরি করছেন
হ্যাঁ।
কেন?
স্যার অ্যাকচুয়ালি স্যার প্রফেসর সঞ্জয় ভারদ্বাজ উনি আমাদেরকে এক্ষুনি জয়েন করছেন আর কি। উনি জয়েন করার পরে আমরা
করে গেছেন, উনি করে গেছেন অলরেডি।
জয়েন করেছেন। হ্যাঁ
No, I already joined.
ওকে স্যার ওকে।
Yes.
তো প্রফেসর প্রশান্ত কুমার শর্মা
Yes. I'm audible. Am I audible?
yes you are audible.
Okay. Well. Okay. Good evening, everyone, and good morning to our friends from America. I, Prashant Kumar Sharma, an assistant professor at the Department of Political Science, Vidhan Chandra College, University of Calcutta, and on behalf of the Department of Political Science, warm-heartedly welcome you all to this international webinar on the front lines of peace, organized by the Department of Political Science in collaboration with the Internal Quality Assurance Cell, Vidhan Chandra College, University of Calcutta. We have got Professor Sanjay K. Bharadwaj and Professor Severin Otesere as the distinguished person to our international webinar. Professor Sanjay K. Bharadwaj, who is the distinguished chair for this international webinar, is a professor and former chairperson at the Center for South Asian Studies and former director at the Energy Studies Program, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. He has also been the recipient of the SRT Fellow Award 2009-2010 at the London School of Economics and Political Science, London. He was also conferred with Asia Fellow Awards 2010-2011 by the Asia Scholarship Foundation, Bangkok. He has also been Chinese Academy of Social Science ICSSR Fellow 2013 in Beijing. In 2018, he became SUSI Fellow on National Security Policy Making at University of Delaware, USA. Currently, he has completed 3 research projects on India's energy security, India's neighborhood policy, and identity politics in Bangladesh. In addition to this, he has authored 3 books and several research articles. He has successfully supervised more than 25 PhD scholars on South Asia. We have Professor Severin Otesere, who is the distinguished speaker for this webinar. Professor Otesere is an award-winning author, peace builder, and researcher, as well as a professor of political science at Barnard College, Columbia University, New York, USA. Professor Otesere has been involved intimately in the world of international aid for more than 20 years. He has successfully conducted research in 12 different countries, from Colombia to Somalia to Israel and the Palestinian territories. He has also worked for Doctors Without Borders in places like Afghanistan and Congo, and at the United Nations headquarters in the United States. Professor Otesere has also been a featured speaker at the World Summit of Nobel Peace Laureates, the United States House of Representatives, and the United Nations Security Council. Moreover, he is the author of The Trouble with the Congo and then Peaceland. Her latest book, The Frontlines of Peace, An Insider's Guide to Changing the World, has just been released by Oxford University Press, which has drawn the worldwide attention of the policy makers and peace builders across the world. It examines what actually works in peace building after mass violence. Now, may I invite our head of the institution, Dr. Ramesh Kaur, the Vice Principal, to deliver a formal welcome address. Sir, now the floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor. Good evening, everyone. Respected, distinguished research person, dear colleague, research scholars, participant, and beloved organizing committee conveners, coordinators, and affectionate students. It is really a great pleasure and a privilege to be present in the international webinar organized by the Department of Political Science in collaboration with IQAC of Vidhan Chandra College. Being the head of the institute, I must congratulate the teachers of the Department of Political Science, especially Mr. Prashant Kumar Sharma and HOD Professor Devdas Dev, as they have taken initiative to organize the international webinar. First of all, I, on behalf of Institute, must welcome a respected research person, Professor Sanjay Kumar Bharadwaj, former chairperson, Center for South Asian Studies, School of International Studies, JNU, New Delhi, and Professor Severin Patesri, award-winning author and peace builder, Department of Political Science, Barnard College, Columbia University, USA. I would be immensely grateful as they have responded to our invitation despite their busy schedule. I do hope that our participant would reap a sound or best from the day's discussion. I firmly believe that the day's discussion would be interesting and interactive one. The survey of the day's space and reciprocal discussion, I do hope, or the remain the minds of the teachers and taught. I wish the warm success of the day's webinar. Once again, thanking you all.
Thank you so much, sir, for the welcome address. May I now invite Professor Sanjay K. Bharadwaj, sir, to kindly chair the session and start the program. Sir, now the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Prashant Sharma, for giving this opportunity to chair this very important webinar on peace and peace building. I also thank you, the Vice Principal of the college, Dr. Ramesh Kar, for giving this, sending your humble invitation to be part of this webinar of IQAC Vidhan Chandra College, Kolkata University. So I'm also thankful to, and this is an opportunity for me to listen Professor Severin Patesri. She has written very important, very significant. She has done significant work, and basically she's a peace builder, not an eminent peace builder and a political scientist. And her contribution to the peace building in academia and in the practice is very well known internationally. So it's my opportunity to listen Professor Severin about her recent book, The Frontlines of Peace, and of course that the ideas, the peace, because it is well debated, or you can say that the definition of peace it changes with the time and with the space, and it is becoming more comprehensive, or you can say more inclusive in a sense that the number of things that being added to the idea and the concept of peace, and that becomes inclusive, because it is not just peace that you are into war and you are into conflict and the things got settled and you are in peace. It's not that, because the peace, the concept and the idea of peace has been linked with the development. It has been linked with the human rights, and of course it is linked very well with the justice. And that international agencies like United Nations in its charter from the very beginning is trying to bring have sustainable peace in a way. But of course that sustainable peace, or you can say that peace building is very important, very significant for the international community, because like our great leader or freedom fighter Mahatma Gandhi said that there is no way to peace. And I was reading one of the article written by Professor Severin also. She has adopted an approach of that bottom-up approach in a way to bring the peace. And there, from Mahatma, I was just trying to understand. Mahatma Gandhi said that there is no way to peace. Peace is the way. Peace is the way. And he said that the second very important thing is that don't don't hate the sinner, or you can say the hate the sin, not the sinner. And that's very, 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 very important things that leads us today to this debates. And that debates starts from, like Amartya Sen also talks in a broader perspective of justice, and that justice comes from multiple concepts or multiple ideas of governance, improving health. We are in the pandemic today, and if there is no health security, there is no peace. And then this idea of peace had also been further discussed and developed, particularly if you're coming with a developing society. It had been in Asia or in Africa. Of course, it had been in the developed countries or Western world. That I'm talking about John Galton's contribution to peace, and that he defined that there are different ways of violence. In fact, he tried to discuss about the positive peace, and in that positive peace, he talk about that there is a peace, there is violence through or direct violence that comes from the war. And that we have seen a number of instances today in Palestine, Israel. They are into the conflicts, and the violence is going on, and we are looking for peace. But there are other very important, significant ideas and aspects of peace that comes until you do not end the structural violence, or you do not end the cultural violence. You cannot look forward to have a sustainable peace. So keeping these things, I would be very happy to listen Professor Severin about her ideas, about her book, about the book on Frontlines of peace, and how she is looking at how we can sustain peace. Because very important things that, like, we for the building of the peace, we are sending UN peacekeeping missions in different parts of the world, or you can say that there is humanitarian interventions, a responsibility to protect. Like you take the case of Libya. What happened? You have finished the one regime of Gaddafi, but there is no peace till in last 10 years in Libya. So there are a number of instances that how do we can have a sustainable peace, or how we can achieve this. So the floor is with you, Professor Severin. I want to listen, and I don't want to lose this opportunity. Yes, Professor Severin.
Thank you so much for this very kind introduction. And to start, I really want to thank all of the organizing team for doing all the work that was necessary to bring me here to you virtually. It's truly an honor for me to be invited to be part of this international seminar. And it's a privilege. And just so you know, I'm extremely happy for two reasons. The first one is that I did visit your country. I visited India a very, very long time ago. I haven't been back for, I think, 25 years almost, but I have absolutely wonderful memories of my time there. And the second reason is that I understand that there are people from all over India, from all over West Bengal, but also all over India, and people who are joining us on YouTube from all over the world. And to me, this is absolutely fantastic. I'm very, very thankful to all of you for inviting me, for joining us. As for me right now, I'm joining you from my home in New York due to the COVID pandemic, which is going much better, but still there are still a lot of restrictions, so I can't access my office. But it doesn't matter, because I'm absolutely thrilled to be talking with you about my new book, The Frontlines of Peace. And now I'm going to share my screen, And so hopefully you're going to see my slide and my PowerPoint presentation. And now I can't see you anymore. So if anything goes wrong with my presentation, if you see that the slides do not don't correspond to what I'm telling you, or if anything goes wrong, please unmute yourself and tell me, because I can't see you. I cannot see the chat. I can only see the screen that I'm showing you. So, The Frontlines of Peace is a book about hope. It's a book about the ordinary and yet extraordinary peoples and communities that have found effective ways to confront violence. And so to start, I thought that I would tell you a story about these kinds of people. And it's a story that takes place in Congo, in the midst of one of the deadliest conflicts since World War II. It's a story that starts in 2007. In 2007, a little boy named Luca was kidnapped and forced to work for an armed group and for rebels, just like the ones that you see in my photo. And Luca was so small at the time that he couldn't even hold a rifle. So his commanders would match him up front and they would use him as a human shield. Somehow, Luca survived, and after 3 years with the armed group, the militia commanders released him and he was sent back home to his mother, Justin. But Luca had trouble assimilating. He hated school. He was often hungry because his mom didn't have much money. And he still believed what his commanders had drilled into him, that the only way to survive was to use violence. So Luca kept running away to join militias. The only time he felt safe was when he had a gun in his hands. He was 8, and this was the only life that he knew. Meanwhile, in the United States, a young Indian American woman named Vijaya Thakur was working for various aid organizations focused on Congo. And Vijaya was growing very uncomfortable with her work because her colleagues used the traditional top-down approach to peace building. They relied on outsider skills and expertise. And as a result, they ended up harming the very people that they wanted to help. So for instance, most of them believed that violence in Congo was due to the illegal exploitation of minerals like coltan, which the young men in my photos are mining. So they focused their time and efforts on organizing new laws on conflict minerals. But the new legislations deprived, cost many vulnerable people their jobs. And these jobs then had to join armed groups in order to survive. So whenever Vijaya traveled to Congo, she started asking ordinary citizens what they believed would lead to peace. And that's a photo of her doing just that. And eventually she decided to try something in the village where Justin and Luca were living. In partnership with local activists, Vijaya organized lengthy meetings and workshops in which the residents would develop their own analysis of the conflicts they face, agree on the most feasible answers, and then implement those solutions. And the first part of the plans that the villagers came up with was for Vijaya and her fellow activists to give out $40 each to a few village women, including Justin, who used the money to start small businesses like tailoring or donut shop, businesses of the kinds you now see on my photos. The businesses took off, and eventually the participants had enough money to implement the second part of their plans. So they installed taps for clean drinking waters, and they organized trainings for the teachers to learn how to curb ethnic violence instead of fueling it. And eventually, they lobbied authorities for protection and better services. So Luca now had 3 meals a day, shoes without holes, and role models who didn't use violence to survive and gain power. And like Luca, all of the villagers were safer and they were healthier. And one day, Vijaya was talking with Justin, and Justin kept using the word success to refer to the whole initiative. It was because Luca had turned 13, and for the first time in his life, he was speaking in the future tense. He had stopped trying to run away all the time, and he was making plans, peaceful plans within his community. He now wanted to hold a pencil instead of a gun. Peace builders who work like, oh, and by the way, now you see the inspiration that the artist had for the cover of my book. Vijaya decided to create the Resolve network. And this network has used more than 7,000 people over the past 10 years. All individuals at risk of being recruited by armed groups, and more than half of them former combatants, like Luca. Militias have formed and reformed in Congo. The pressure to remobilize has been enormous, but not a single person participating in the Resolve programs has either started or gone back to fighting. And to me, this story is inspiring. It's also very telling because there are big differences between the way most peace-building organizations work and what Vijaya did. To start, Vijaya decided to build peace from the grassroots by relying on insiders instead of always focusing on elite and leaders in capital cities and headquarters. And even more importantly, Vijaya didn't come and impose her beliefs, and that way she avoided doing more harm than good. And like so many people before her, Vijaya was humble, she was respectful, and she put ordinary citizens in the driver's seat. Peace builders who work like Vijaya are a small minority in the aid world, but they exist. I've found them within many different organizations, working in many different countries. And the work they do is incredibly important because, unfortunately, there are many people who face the kind of terrible circumstances that Justin and Luca faced. 1.5 billion people live under the threat of violence in nearly 50 conflict zones around the world, in the places that you see in red, in the countries that you see in red on my map. And so peace building is a crucial task for many states and international institutions. And by peace building, I mean any and all actions that help promote peace before, during, and after a conflict. The thing is that our templates and techniques for approaching war and peace just don't work. Afghanistan, Colombia, Congo, Syria, Ukraine, Myanmar, we've heard the same story many times before. There was violence, the United Nations got involved. Other countries pledged millions in assistance. Warring parties called for ceasefires, they signed agreements, held elections, and the headlines praised peace. And then a week or two later, sometimes just days later, violence flared up again. Often it had never actually ended, and in many cases, it lasted for years after. More than half of all ongoing wars have already lasted for more than 20 years. In just the past 5 years, wars have spawned the worst refugee crisis since World War II. And our newspapers keep running headlines like the ones that you see in my slide. And there has been plenty of discussion about what has gone wrong when we've tried to stop wars in the past. But now I think it's time to ask, what has gone right? And it turns out that elections don't build peace, and democracy itself may not be the golden ticket, at least not in the short term. Contrary to what most politicians preach, building peace doesn't require billions in aid or massive international interventions. Instead, it often involves giving power to ordinary citizens. Ultimately, many successful examples of peace building in the past few years have involved innovative grassroots initiatives led by local people and at times supported by foreigners like the South African peacekeeper you see with me in the photo, often using methods shunned by the international elite. So rather than focusing on handshakes between presidents, abstract peace agreements, and negotiations between governments and rebel leaders, The Frontlines of Peace details the concrete, everyday actions that actually make a difference on the ground. And you'll see some of these are bizarre, some are creative, some involve age-old traditions, and some are just common sense. My book explains how peace building can actually work so that we can finally improve the lives of billions of people. And I show that to end violence from war and also to address violent conflicts at home, whether home is New York, like for me, or Calcutta, or anywhere else, or Paris or London. We have to fundamentally change the way we view and build peace. And I make this argument by drawing on field research in 12 different conflict zones, the ones here that you see in red on my maps. And of course, I didn't put India on my map because I didn't conduct research for this book in India, but you will see during the presentation that a lot of what I heard and what I learned when I was 25 years ago in India, that has actually shaped my thinking and that has really influenced my way of thinking about the world and about peace. And for this book, I also draw on more than 800 interviews that I conducted with peace builders, warlords, populations, ordinary citizens, outside observers. So if you can see my photos now, on the right-hand side, the bottom right-hand side, you see me conducting interviews. And on the bottom left, I'm conducting participant observations. I was patrolling with Indian peacekeepers. And I was very happy that day. I remember I felt, oh, I'm such a good ethnographer. I'm really fitting in. But the thing is that I'm not a man, and there were only men on this military base because India had sent only men to Congo at the time. And also, I felt that there was something wrong with my bulletproof jacket. I went patrolling for several hours with the Indian peacekeepers, and the bulletproof jacket felt heavy, it was uncomfortable, it didn't protect my heart or any of my vital organs. And it's only when we were back to the base that one of the Indian officers came to me and he said, you know, you've been wearing it backward. Anyway, I still got really good material that day. So in the Frontlines of Peace, I first tell the stories of ordinary people and grassroots activists and foreign interveners who have managed to make a difference in war zones. Then I describe the limitations of the conventional way to build peace, which I call Peace Inc., and which relies on governments, elites, and foreign peace builders, and usually excludes ordinary citizens and grassroots activists. And then I suggest a better way to help reestablish peace in war zones around the world. And in conclusion, I show how the residents of ostensibly peaceful country, whether in North America or in Europe or India, can use the lessons from the book to address violence conflict at home, ranging from political conflict to religious, ethnic, and racial divides. So let me tell you the story of Itri, which is quite literally an island of peace in Congo. So for the past 25 years, one of the deadliest conflicts since World War II has raged around Itri. And despite the presence of one of the largest and most expensive peacekeeping mission in the world, United Nations peacekeeping mission, several million people have died and hundreds continue to die every day, but Itri itself has avoided mass violence. The island is stunningly beautiful, as you can see in the photo that I took when I was there and that you now see on my slide. But what makes the place even more noteworthy and the peace even more surprising is that the island contains all of the same preconditions for violence that have fueled generalized fighting in other parts of Congo. You have a geostrategic location. Itri is located right at the border between Congo, and Rwanda, two countries that have been at war regularly since the 1990s. Eritrea also has mineral resources, ethnic tensions, lack of state authority, extreme poverty, local conflicts over land and traditional power, and many other features that have led to generalized fighting in other parts of Congo, in the neighboring provinces. And what's fascinating about Eritrea is that the island is peaceful because of the active, everyday involvement of all of its citizens, including the ones you see in my slides, and including the poorest and these powerful ones. So it's not the state, the police, or the army who manage to control tensions, and it's not foreign peace builders either. It is the members of the community themselves. And they do this by fostering what they call a culture of peace, by organizing in grassroots associations and local structures that help resolve conflicts, and by drawing on strong beliefs that help deter violence by both insiders and outsiders, such as blood pacts. Blood pacts are traditional promises between two parties who agree never to hurt each other. The story of Eritrea shows us that local community resources can sometimes build peace better than the usual elite agreements and outside interventions. And foreign peace builders can help in this process. So take the teams of the Life and Peace Institute in Congo. LPI is a Swedish peace-building organization that is involved in various conflict zones and usually focuses on working at the grassroots. The LPI Congo team bases its actions on in-depth local expertise, and they reject universal approaches to peace building. They rely on local employees supervised by a few foreigners, and these foreigners often have extensive pre-existing country knowledge. LPI doesn't implement programs directly. Instead, it works with and through a few handpicked local organizations, and the main role of these organizations is to support people on the ground. These local organizations empower ordinary citizens to develop their own analysis of their community's conflict, to agree on the most feasible answers, and then to implement the solutions. So you see the difference with the usual way to build peace in conflict zones. In the LPI model, it's not foreigners based in headquarters and capital cities who conceive, design, and implement peace-building programs. It's not national or provincial elites either, and it's not the state or the government. Instead, it is the intended beneficiaries, including ordinary people and including combatants, who conceive, design, and implement peace-building initiatives, just like they are doing now. Here they are conceiving the peace-building initiatives with the help of LPI and its local partners. And I'm going to give you a concrete example so that you can see how this actually works in practice. So for several years, there was a very deadly conflict in the Ruzizi Plain in eastern Congo. And it led to a lot of deaths, a lot of suffering, and the involvement of local militias, the Congolese armed groups, and even the Rwandan government. And in 2007, 3 Congolese organizations decided to address these tensions with the help of LPI and its local partners. For 3 years, they focused on understanding what the problem was. They organized a lot of small and large meetings, and in these meetings, they included everyone: ordinary citizens, ministers, farmers, women's groups, rebel leaders, rank and foot soldiers, civil society activists. They progressively realized that the conflict was not so much a proxy war between Congo and Rwanda, as we interveners thought at the time, but rather it was a conflict between herders and farmers, because cattle often destroyed crops. The farmers retaliated by killing the herders, who reached out to local militias who went on to attack the farmers' communities, and so on and so forth. And so all of the people involved, the combatants, the ordinary citizens, they all designed solutions that they thought would work to address the problems that they viewed at the root of the violence. So, for instance, they installed tracks for moving cattle with minimal disruption to farmers. They also established mediation committees in which representatives of both herders and farmers would smooth out any tensions that may arise, because, you know, with cattle, we all know that you can't always make sure that they stay on the right path. So, of course, there were issues, challenges, and setbacks. But to make a very long story short, while all of the elite agreements and large peace conferences had never really made a difference on the ground, local militias saw tangible results once LPI and its local partners got involved. For several years, the seasonal migration of cattle took place with very little violence. Dozens of militiamen handed in their weapons, and ethnic groups that were fighting slowly started working and living together. They started sharing the same market, for instance. So outsiders can help reestablish peace. But the catch is that to really help, we can't continue acting the way they usually do. Because there are countless limitations with the conventional way to build peace, which I call Peace Inc., and which relies on governments, elites, and foreign peace builders, and usually excludes the ordinary citizens and grassroots activists. The Peace Inc. conventional approach to peace building relies on detrimental and misleading assumptions, like the idea that only top-down intervention can end armed violence. The idea that all good things come together. So, for instance, that elections will naturally lead to peace. And the idea that only outsiders have the required skills and expertise to build peace. So let me tell you the way my own career in international aid got started. When I was 23, I got my very first job out of graduate school as assistant country director for Médecins du Monde, Doctors of the World, in Kosovo. And if you see my photo now, on the photo, that's me at the time, just a couple of years after I spent time in India. And next to me is my wonderful husband, Philip, who, by the way, owns the copyright of many photos I'm showing you today. When I arrived in Kosovo, I didn't speak Albanian or Serbo-Croatian. I had virtually no knowledge of Kosovo history, politics, and culture. I actually started reading my first book about the Balkans on the war there, but the flight was too short, so I never finished that book. But I got the job because I spoke decent English. I had 2 fancy master's degrees, a solid training in political analysis, and also some field experience in developing countries and post-war places. And in hindsight, I feel terrible when I think about my Kosovo assistant at the time. His name was Nerim. Nerim had 20 years experience analyzing political, social, and economic issues. He had lived in Kosovo all his life. He had a tremendous knowledge of the Balkans' history, politics, and culture. He was also much older and much wiser than I was, but I was the outsider, so I was in charge. And the thing is that I had never really managed anyone in my life before. I was 23. So I had no idea how to deal with him. And eventually I found a way to keep him busy. I asked him to compile and translate clippings from the local press. And I can still see him every morning religiously posting his work on our bulletin board, and none of my colleagues read it. Even I often didn't have the time to do that. It was such a waste of time, energy, and talent. And the thing is that that was not a stroke of good luck for me and bad luck for Narim. That was a typical situation for foreign peace builders. Most foreign peace builders believe that local people do not have what it takes to build peace, that they are incompetent, corrupt, and violent. Otherwise, they wouldn't be at war. And by contrast, interveners believe that they have the required skills and expertise. To them, what makes a good peace builder is education and work experience in specialized topics like gender or human rights or election organizations, and if possible, having worked in a variety of conflict zones. In contrast, and although there are exceptions, the knowledge of country specialists is usually much less valued, and the knowledge of local people is usually trivialized. And the result is that in virtually all aid and peace-building organizations, foreigners fill the management positions and local people make up the lower level staff. And the local people often the foreigners often do not speak local languages, and they often have no in-depth understanding of the local cultures, societies, and institutions. The consequences are often disastrous. Well-meaning international efforts have increased violence in places like Afghanistan and Congo. And I'm going to tell you a story that to me encapsulates all of that. In 2007, militias took over the city of Bukavu in eastern Congo. Actually, it was in 2003. In 2003, militias took over the city of Bukavu in eastern Congo, and they went on a looting, raping, and killing spree. And at a point, a little boy and his mother saw several soldiers enter the house just next to theirs. And they heard shouts and screams. It was obvious that their neighbor was about to be raped. So the little boys ran to seek help at the nearby peacekeeping base. But when he arrived, the sentry on duty that day was a Uruguayan soldier who didn't speak Swahili and didn't speak French. Okay, so the little boy was panicking. He tried and tried to communicate what was happening, but still the peacekeeper didn't understand. And finally, the peacekeeper broke into a huge smile, and he made a sign that, yes, I get it, please wait. He went inside the base, and he came back a few minutes later with a bag of cookies that he handed to the boy. So outsiders do not always understand what's going on, and relying exclusively on them can be really problematic. And another big issue with our standard approach to peace is that in many conflicts, violence revolves around political, social, and economic stakes that are distinctively local. And when I say local, I really mean at the level of the individual, the family, the clan, the district, the community. And I realized that during one of my very first trips to Congo. It was 20 years ago. I met this woman who was my age, and local militias had attacked her village. Her name was Isabel, and local militias had attacked Isabel's village. They had killed many men, they had raped many women, they had looted everything. And then they wanted to take Isabel, but her husband stepped in and he said, no, please, please don't take Isabel, take me instead. So he had gone to the forest with the militias, and Isabel never saw him again. And the reason why militias had attacked Isabel's village was not because of anything related to national and international tensions, like the war between Congo and Rwanda that we were all focusing on at the time. No, it was because local militias wanted to take the land that the villagers needed to cultivate food and to survive. And this story has stayed in my mind all these years because it embodies the awful consequences of local conflicts that foreign peace builders so often ignore. And I'm happy to elaborate on our the problems with our standard approach to peace during the discussion if you're interested. But I want to use the 10-15 minutes that I have left to tell you how we can change that. Because I really think that we need to work on and to build on success stories instead of always focusing on elite and, on challenges, issues, and failure. So these past few years, I've looked for cases of what I call unlikely peace. Places where everything conspires to cause violence, and yet somehow you have peace, like in Italy. And I found places like that all over the world, in Afghanistan, Colombia, Congo, Israel and the Palestinian territory, Somalia, like for instance, in the 2 villages where I took the photo you now see on my slide. And the example that I like best is the story of Somaliland. There is a really interesting contrast between, on the one hand, Somalia, which is extremely violent, has some of the highest rankings in the world least desirable category, most corrupt country, second most failed state, etc. And on the other hand, the autonomous region in the north of Somalia that is called Somaliland, that went through a devastating independence war with Somalia in the late 80s and in the 1990s. A war that destroyed nearly 90% of the towns, some of which still haven't been rebuilt. But for the past 20 years, Somaliland has experienced little violence, little terrorism, and it now has a well-functioning state, decent public services, as you can see in my photo of the capital, Hargeisa, and even some kind of functioning democracy. And there are many reasons for this difference, but the key one is that the usual Peace Inc. outsiders-led top-down approach prevailed in the rest of Somalia, while Somaliland benefited from sustained grassroots peace-building initiatives that were led by insiders, by Somalilanders themselves. And the example of Somaliland shows that local people can help promote peace, not only on a small scale, like in Italy, but also over a large territory and a quasi-state. And the good news is that we, outsiders, can help promote this kind of efforts without falling into the same old tired relationships between outsiders and insiders that I've told you about, and without destroying local peace efforts, as interveners so often do. Because there are role models we can learn from. In my research, I've found a lot of out-of-the-box approaches by interveners who did manage to really make a difference, both at the highest level and on the country. And I talk about these people a lot in the book, The Frontlines of Peace. They're named Vijaya Thakur, Vanual Tumbas, James Canberry, Peter Van Holden, Lemak Bowie. I could go on and on. They come from all over the world, some of them from India, and they work for very different organizations in very different countries. They have a few things in common. To start, they don't think that as outsiders they know better, that they have the right theories, skills, and expertise, or that they bring the ideal solutions to people's problems. Instead, they respect local residents, they listen to them, and they're open-minded. They understand that other people may have a different understanding of peace, democracy, development, and different priorities. They also know the local context well. They speak at least some of the local languages, and they have extensive local networks. They don't place themselves at the forefront of peace efforts, and they don't put their logos everywhere. Instead, they remain low profile, and they turn the spotlights on the achievements of their local partners, local authorities, local populations, local staff. They're also in it for the long run. They stay on site for years, sometimes decades. They're flexible. They keep adapting their strategies based on the results and feedback that they get and the way the situation evolves. And lastly, they understand that sometimes there are hard choices to be made because not all good things come together. So we may have to choose between worthy goals, for instance, between peace and justice or peace and democracy. And the best interveners understand that they shouldn't be the ones who make these choices. The people who have to live with the consequences of a decision should be the ones making it. And by way of conclusion, there is one last thing that I want to mention. All of these ideas, all of these lessons from conflict zones can help us only address not only tensions in war zones around the world, but also tensions in ostensibly peaceful places like political, religious, and cultural divides in the United States, in Europe, in peaceful parts of India. So for instance, let's take my own country, the United States. We all know that violence is rising in the United States. There has been an increasing number of shootings and killings over the past couple of years. And of course, it's nowhere near the level of violence that we see in Congo and Somalia, but still, there are three things that all of us, residents of the United States, of Calcutta, New Delhi, all of us can learn from residents of war-torn places so that we can improve the situations in our own communities. To start, we can start building informal relationships with our opponents, whether they are political, religious, ethnic, or cultural opponents. You remember, for instance, that this is how residents of the zones of peace have done. It's by listening, talking, and bonding over shared interests that the residents of Ijwi and Somaliland have managed to decrease tensions and violence and prevent violence around them, like my two friends have done here in Ijwi. So for us, sport clubs, religious groups, art associations, trade unions, these are all good places where we can start building common ground. And for instance, in the United States, that's really the strategy used by activists like Christian Picciolini, who's a former gang leader, and Daryl Davis, who's an African-American jazz musician. By developing personal relationships with the members of white extremist groups, Christian and Daryl have managed to convince hundreds of militants to renounce hatred. The second thing that all of us can do is build on the specific of our own local cultures to help decrease tensions around us. So you remember how the residents of Ijwi build on their specific customs and beliefs to decrease violence around them. Well, closer to my home in the south side of Chicago in the United States, there was a group of women who were absolutely fed up with seeing so much bloodshed and violence around them. So they decided to hang out on street corners. They brought folding chairs and they sat on them for hours and hours. And the thing is that in Chicago, nobody wants to kill someone in front of their own mother. So the number of shootings and killings in their communities has decreased a lot over time. And the last thing we can all do is to support grassroots, bottom-up associations with time, money, efforts, whatever we can spare. You remember how important grassroots associations were in helping build a heaven of peace in Ijwi. Well, grassroots associations have proven just as effective in other parts of the world. So for instance, coming back to my own country, the United States, the organization Cure Violence has managed to reduce shooting and killings by up to 73% in more than 20 different cities. And they've done that by using the same kind of bottom-up, insiders-led approach that have worked so well in places like Ijwi and Somaliland. And of course, our administration and Congress and representatives and governments have an important role to play because, as we all know, real peace lasts only when built both from the bottom up and from the top down. But the important point is that whether at home or abroad, we solely need more individuals like Vijaya and Justin, and more people like the inhabitants of Ichwi and Somaliland. We sorely need more organizations that work like Resolve and the Life and Peace Institutes, and more programs that follow the basic principles that I've told you about. Because it's with organizations and programs like these that we can help the 1.5 billion people who live under the threat of violence in conflict zones around the world, and that we can also improve the situations in our own communities. So of course, all of these ideas are not magic ones, but because they take into account deeply rooted causes of conflict, they can definitely be game changers. And so if you want to know more about that, please feel free to ask a question now. Q&As are always my favorite part of this kind of events. You can also follow me on social media. I'm the most active on Twitter, but I also have post stuff regularly on Instagram and Facebook. You can check out my webpage because there are the full text of all of my articles and a lot of resources that you may enjoy on my webpage, severinauthorshare.com. And of course, my 3 books have a lot more ideas, details, and stories about everything that we're discussing today. And I actually consider The Frontlines of Peace to be the best of my 3 books. So I'd be really honored if you would check it out. Thank you so much for listening. I look forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for very enlightening, very touching lecture that you have shared your experience with the audience, and that your work, that you work with your heart, in fact, that going with the different places, traveling and knowing the conflicting zone. That's very wonderful lecture. Thank you very much. In fact, that you have shared that how you can learn from local success stories to bring the sustainable peace, or you can build the peace. How you can build, and you have come out with different stories, like the story of Ichwi, that is situated in between Congo and Rwanda, and that how they have come out with the peace building. And particularly that you have come out that how you can build a sustainable peace by involving local communities. And there you have come out with the view that a bottom-up approach would be more sustainable to bring the sustainable peace in the community. And different examples you have given while you are delivering your lecture. And in fact, very interestingly, that I remember that how earlier that the concept and the idea of poverty was known, and in fact that poverty was linked with moreover with the economic poverty. And then Amartya Sen had given the idea of multidimensional poverty, and that has been linked with that you don't think that if you do not have money that you are poor. If you do not have education, you are poor. If you do not have good health, you are poor. And that the way you are bringing the idea of and the concept of peace for the community, it's really I appreciate your effort. And in fact, you have also talked about the role played by Life and Peace initiatives, that LPI, how they had been instrumental in developing the confidence among the local people to develop a sustainable peace in the society. So and very interesting thing. I'm very impressed. I'm inspired from Mahatma Gandhi, the father of the nation. In fact, he talked that I love conflict, and if there are conflict, then there are the conflict of ideas, the conflict of different perspectives. And in that conflict, what he talked, that the conflict will generate the dialogues. And while you will generate the dialogues, you will have the dialogues, you will reach on the you will find the truth. So what you have been doing, going to different places and writing and contributing, that you are basically understanding the conflict and coming out that how to achieve a peace. So thank you very much for your wonderful lecture. There are a number of questions I'm going to read, and then you can answer, I think, one by one. First question, you have already answered that. Tell me about, this is Arpit Chakravarti I talked about, tell me about this book you have all discussed a lot, and why is useful for us.
Yeah.
You want to...
May I answer the question one by one? Because if you give me all of the questions at once, I will never remember which question. So,
please.
Yes, I have answered the book, but the question about why the book is helpful. But if you have any additional question, I'm of course happy to answer.
Yes, there are. The second question is from Prabir Kanti. Prabir Kanti has talked about, Madam, don't you think that sustainable peace is an easy Dorado because autocrats have grabbed power in different parts of the world? They are talking about the populism, politics of populism, autocratic regimes that emerged in different. That are you really looking at peace in these countries?
Can you rephrase the question, please, so that I understand better?
You can. This is basically he's written in a way that demo autocrats have grabbed the power in different parts of the world, like the politics of populism. In the politics of populism, do we really expect that there would be peace?
Okay, well, if you look at all of the countries that I mentioned in the Frontlines of Peace, you see countries that are democratic, you see countries that are autocratic, you see wealthy countries, you see very poor countries, you see countries where all kind of different social organizations, all kind of different models of government, all kind of different model of governance. And what's really important is that the peace that I look at is not the kind of peace that people usually think about when they think about peace. It's not handshakes between presidents. It's not the kind of thing that happens between governments and rebel leaders. It's really what happens on the ground, in the villages, talking and living with ordinary people. And I show that in every single country, whether we're talking about like a democratic country, to use the word that you just coined, or whether we're talking about countries with other forms of governance, we can find pockets of peace. And we can find pockets of peace no matter what the elites are doing, whether they're grabbing power or whether they're sharing power or whether they're distributing power within the entire country.
Thank you. I have next question from Jamima Parveen. Jamima has two questions. She has two questions. One is that we can see there are continuous clashes between Palestine and Israel due to political or terrorist regions. So my question is, in such conflict, what is your opinion to solve the problem through your model of peacekeeping? Do you think local people can solve the problem? Our second question is that in many places we see the core countries interfere in conflicted areas, mainly in periphery, to restore peace. But in many places they try to establish their model of government, or they try to increase their power. Even sometimes UN is biased. So in such situations, how can peace be truly established?
Thank you so much. Thank you for these two questions. So on the first one, I actually have a section of my book that looks at Israel and the Palestinian territories. And I think it goes directly to the heart of your question, because there is a little village called Neve Shalom Wahat El Salam that is on the former separation line, the former ceasefire line between the Arab countries and Israel. And it is a little village that was founded precisely to show that Israeli and Palestinian people, that Israeli Jews and Palestinian peoples can live in peace together. And they do live in peace, and they actually model a way of living together in peace, in sharing the two cultures, learning the two languages, and sharing everything in a way that benefits actually everybody in the community, not just one or the other members of one community or the other community. And so to me, yes, the model that I mentioned is definitely something that kind of works in Israel and the Palestinian territories, and also the role models that I mentioned. You remember my little stick figure, green stick figure with the thought bubbles everywhere. All of the ideas on how to interact with for international interveners to interact with inhabitants of conflict zones. That's how to be the most effective outside help, both at the highest level and on the ground. And so, as I was saying, we need to continue working with the elites. So we need to continue working with the Hamas, with the Fatah, with the Israeli government, because we need to make sure that they resolve their problems together, in addition to resolving all of the problems on the ground. But when I was talking with people in Jerusalem, in Tel Aviv, in Ramallah, I heard a lot of stories and a lot of things and a lot of criticisms of Peace Inc. that exactly similar to the ones that I've been telling you today. And also when they were telling me the things that work, the kind of outside help that works, it was exactly what I've just told you today: being flexible, being humble, understanding what's going on, not arriving and thinking that you have the solution and that you bring, you bring the ideal solutions to people's problem, and that you have the right theory, skills, and expertise. So all of that, all of these ideas were in part generated by working in Israel and the Palestinian territories, and so they are applicable to the problem in Israel and the Palestinian territories. And as to the fact that in many places we see countries that are trying to establish their model of government, to increase their power, and the United Nations has trouble dealing with these countries. It's something that, again, we see in the 12 different, in all of the conflict zones in which I work. You remember my map with the different countries in red on the slide. For instance, you take Congo. All of the Congo's neighbors have been involved at a point on Congolese territory to try to increase their power, to try to get resources. And the United Nations peacekeeping mission is, if you've read the news about Congo recently, the United Nations peacekeeping mission is extremely unpopular. Congolese people have taken to the street, especially in the eastern part of the country, to ask for the United Nations peacekeeping mission to leave. And again, I have shown in the book, and I hope I've shown you during the presentation, that there is another way to build peace, that there is another way to reduce conflict, and that this is a way that is much more respectful of ordinary citizens and of the different countries in which we are intervening, and that actually works much better.
Yeah. I request the audience, please drop your questions if you have any in the chat box. Next question is from Mr. Samidra Mohan Biswas. He has 2-3 questions, in fact. What do you think the peace process will be during Joe Biden administration vis-a-vis Pakistan? Basically, he's taking a broader perspective that how the Joe Biden will deal with Pakistan in South Asia. The second question, how the Biden administration will deal with the India vis-a-vis China in future. So these are two political. The third question, he has also one more question. What will be the role of USA in Afghanistan, especially after their withdrawal of forces? I have one additional question to this Afghanistan, that there are intra-Afghan negotiations is going on. And I do see that there are a number of the stakeholders are involved in the negotiations. I do not find much women representation in this in negotiations. And do you really feel that there would be, if they will reach any negotiations without women, there would be a sustainable peace? There would be just peace. I would say there would be just peace in Afghanistan. Yes.
Well, Thank you so much. So on all of the questions about, USA vis-a-vis Pakistan, vis-a-vis India, vis-a-vis China, vis-a-vis Afghanistan, I understand that we have on this call, we have actually experts of India's foreign policy, of relationships in the region, of the international relations within the region. So I wouldn't want to waste anybody's time by talking about things that I don't know well, and I would completely defer to my esteemed colleagues in this call who have been written dozens of books and dozens of articles, and who are actually the experts on these kinds of topics. And if you want to answer these questions, I'd love to listen to you, because that way I would learn something really interesting about a topic that I don't study. And on the question about the representation of Afghan of women, I mean the lack of representation of women in the Afghan peace processes, I fully agree with you. The first thing is that unfortunately it's not uncommon. We all know the statistics about the lack of representation of women in formal peace processes, still less than 13%. And then when you look at the number of women who are actual signatories of peace agreements, the number drops to, I think, 5 or 7%. I mean, it's really nothing. So unfortunately, unfortunately, it's not uncommon. And as you say, everything that I've been saying today is, if you want to actually have real peace, and if you want to have peace that is sustainable and that can last, you need to include everybody in the definition of the problem, in the definition of the solution, in the implementation of the solution. So knowing that women make up approximately 50% of the world's population and 50%, let's say more or less, of Afghanistan's population, how can you think about having peace in any country, whether Afghanistan or another place, when you exclude 50% of the population? It's just not feasible, and it's never going to work.
Yeah, there another question from Mr. Himanshu Bharadwaj. Himanshu's question is to you, madam, of course. Do you think in the age of radical nationalism, especially after 2013, in major democratic and non-democratic countries like USA, Russia, China, the bottom-up approach of peace-building process is innovative and effective, while the national interest of a country is dominant factor in international politics?
So thank you very much for this question. This question is a bit loaded because it assumes that the national interest of a country is a dominant factor in international politics. And as you know, because you work on that, and as we all know, there is actually a huge debate on that. And especially, I think that it's important to think about which country we're talking about, and which intervening country, but also which country of intervention. Because let's say that the US national interest may be much more prominent when it's dealing with, let's say, Afghanistan or Saudi Arabia than when it's dealing with a country like Congo or Yemen. And so that's the first thing. And on your broader question, which I find really important, on whether the bottom-up approach to peace building can actually be combined with the top-down approach, there is a way to combine them. And to me, that's the idea that sometimes the national interest is actually to promote peace. So I mean, sometimes it's not, but when there is this way to promote peace, you can combine the two. And when the national interest is not to promote peace, there are always, from what I've seen, is that there are always people within the administration who disagree, who want to promote peace, who want to make things better. And so these people who work within the administration, within the different foreign affairs ministries, with non-governmental organizations, etc., they can also use this approach.
Yeah, I have two small questions, in fact. I do find sometimes like there are peace building measures or confidence building measures that take place between the two countries if they are in conflict. And I take the example of like India and Pakistan, they have been in conflict for last 70 years. I do find that there are number of efforts to bring the peace or building the peace between the two countries, and I do find there are while you go for the confidence building measures, you have you negotiate between the political party, or you develop a dialogue between the stakeholders who are already in the conflict. So how do you find that involving the stakeholders, they are already in the conflicts, would really bring the sustainable peace? This is one question. Number two, I also find, like, you take the case of Libya, and Libya, I think that there were a UN intervention or NATO's intervention in case of Libya under UN Security Council's resolutions of 1970 and then later on 73 under the responsibility to protect. And the main motive of the UN Security Council, or you can say NATO's, was to bring democracy, peace and stability, and of course the human rights violations that was taking during the Gaddafi's regime. But how it has really been after the Gaddafi's regime, that I think that there are political chaos, there are human rights violation, there are radicalizations of the politics within in Libya, and I do also find that the international actors or the countries who are having interest in Libya are involved in accelerating these kinds of conflicts, and there are no hope of the conflict in of the peace in Libya. Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to answer the first question, and then I'll ask you to tell me again what is the question in the second part, because I heard you say there is no hope for peace and all of the reasons, but I didn't hear a question for me.
Okay.
So on the first one, that's key. And thank you for bringing this, because that's actually a key part. If you do not involve the stakeholders, how do you? I'm going to answer your question with another question. How do you want to build peace if you do not include the stakeholders? If you do not include the combatants? If you do not ask them, why are you fighting? Like, why actually are you fighting? What would it take for you to stop fighting? You need to ask everybody, what would it take for you to not use violence? How can we implement any kind of solution so that you don't use violence? And you need to find a consensus that works for everyone who is involved, so the combatants for all of different sides and the stakeholders from all of the different parties. And that's why I really like the LPI model, the Life and Peace Institute. You remember the story I told you about the Ruzizi plain and the cattle herders, farmers, etc. To me, it's really important because they really, really made sure they included everyone. They talked with all of the combatants, they talked with people on all sides of the divides. They included the ministers, they included the people who were, how do you say in English? Tirer les ficelles. Like who were manipulating from the outside, from outside capital cities, from outside countries. So they really included everyone. And what's really important to keep in mind is that this takes a lot of time. And to me, that's the thing that is really it's really important and is the most difficult for people to acknowledge and to address, because when you think of just the herder farmer conflict in the Ruzizi plain, it took them 3 years. 3 years just to find an agreement so that they could actually talk to find a solution. So 3 years just to define the problem and to have a sense of who had to be involved. So to me, including all of the local stakeholders is really important, but you need to identify all of them and you need a lot of time to make sure they're all on board. And as to whether my, the bottom-up approach can actually work in, you were mentioning the conflict in India and Pakistan. So of course, haven't been to your country in 25 years. I'm never going to dare say anything about it, and especially I have never been in my life in the border area between India and Pakistan. But I have a few students at Columbia University at SIPA who are both Indian students and Pakistani students, and quite a few of them have written recently recently for their final papers for my class. They've written papers on the Indian-Pakistani conflict and on what's happening in the border areas, in the contested areas, in the violent part of your countries. And they all show that we can use these ideas. And that actually there are already people in Kashmir, in other parts of your territory that are using these ideas to really make a positive difference on the ground.
Yeah, there are hardly any threat to dialogue and diplomacy between India and Pakistan. There are hardly any people-to-people contact. That it's a really. Second question was about. In fact, I was asking Libya after the popular movement in Libya to remove Gaddafi, and there were human rights violation, and UN the UN peacekeeping forces or under UN Security Council resolution of 1970, they have intervened. NATO has intervened. But what happened after Gaddafi and after that there are a lot of political instability, crisis, chaos in Libya, and that has been spread to entire region. In fact, so how do you find that there would be sustainable peace?
Thank you. And to me, that's exactly the point. We were talking about Peace Inc., Peace Incorporated, the idea of, everything that I've mentioned, all of these issues with Peace Inc., you saw them at work in Libya. The idea that, you bring a military solution to a conflict that is political, economic, social, that has a lot of non-military dimensions. The idea that outsiders try to resolve the conflict for Libyan people, that they work from the top down, that they interact mostly with elites, with rebel leaders, with governments, with elites, and that very often ordinary citizens are not included in the design and planning of their efforts, although there was one of the UN representatives who really tried, and I know that he really tried to work from the bottom up, but he was facing a lot of constraints within the United Nations and with other donors. So to me, Libya is like the perfect examples of what I was telling you, how Peace Inc., the standard approach to peace building, just doesn't work, and sometimes, as you're saying, sometimes it actually makes things worse.
Yes, there one more question from Mr. Sukhdev Das. He's asking, do you think Islamic fundamentalism is a major threat to international security?
It's not at all what the book is about. So again, I know that there are many people on this call who work on international security and Islamic fundamentalism. So again, I'm going to defer to my colleagues who are experts in these topics.
So I think we had a number of questions, and very smartly, very academically you have dealt it. So thank you very much for your very academic and enlightening lecture on peace building and about your book. And I would certainly recommend to my students as well in Jawaharlal Nehru University. And if you have any opportunities after post-pandemic, I would be happy to have you in Jawaharlal Nehru University as well. So thank you very much. I think Mr. Prashant Sharma, you can take the.
Thank you so much, sir, and thank you so much, ma'am, for this magnificent dialogue. May I now invite Ms. Jamima Parveen, coordinator of this program, to deliver a vote of thanks. Jamima, now the floor is yours.
It is my privilege to have been asked to propose vote of thanks to all who have been helped us in making this one-day international webinar such a resounding success. First of all, we would like to extend our profound gratitude to our Vice Principal, Dr. Ramesh Kar sir, the head of the institution, for granting us permission and for giving us constant support and encouragement toward the successful conduct of webinar. We express our heartiest thanks to Professor Sanjay K. Bharadwaj sir, former chairperson at the Center of South Asian Studies, School of International Relations, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, for agreeing to chair this webinar on the frontline of peace and made it a vibrant, thought-provoking academic event. Thank you so much, sir. We extend our heartiest thanks to Professor Sovereign Austen ma'am for not only sparing her invaluable time, but also for enlightening us with her commendable and constructive knowledge pertaining to the frontline of peace. Thank you so much, ma'am, for being with us and for accepting our invitation despite your hectic schedule. Now, I would like to thank to the president of the governing body of our college, Dr. Sudipta Roy, sir, and all the members of the governing body for their constant moral support to our webinar. Our thank also goes to the BUSAR, Dr. Subhajit Ghosh, sir, and to the coordinator of the IQAC, Professor Sadhunath Kundu, sir, for their moral support. We acknowledge the unwavering support and guidance received from Professor Devdas De, sir, head of the Department of Political Science. We would like to extend our sincere and heartiest thanks to Professor Prashant Kumar Sharma, sir, an assistant professor at the Department of Political Science and convener, for taking up the initiative to organize this webinar. Thank you so much, sir. We would like to thank Dr. Abdul Khalik, sir, an assistant professor at the Department of Physics, and Professor Unmesh Mondal, sir, an assistant professor at the Department of Computer Science, for performing their responsibilities as technical advisor in the best possible manner. Our vote of thanks also goes to the Professor Devtanu Maji, sir, Professor Kamal Roy, sir, Professor Anindita Mitra, ma'am, all at the Department of Political Science for the constant support in the webinar. We extend our heartiest thanks to all the respected professors of all the department and all the non-teaching staff of our college for their moral support. A special thanks goes to the student of the Department of Political Science for enthusiastically coordinating and supporting the webinar by showing fervent interest from the very beginning. Last but not the least, our sincere thanks goes to all the respected participants present here for their active participation and for making this event a success. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Jamima. I also acknowledge yours and Mr. M. Suresh Murthy's effort in organizing this webinar. I once again thank you all for your participation. We are hoping to see you all again. Have a wonderful time. Thank you so much once again.
Have a good day, Professor Shevin.
Thank you so much. Have a good night to all of you, because I understand it's the night for you. And thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for your question. Thank you for being such wonderful hosts. And I hope to see you in person one day post-pandemic. And be safe and healthy, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much. Take care. Have a nice time.